Hello, and welcome everyone to a special online event today called Explore the Effective Use of Psilocybin in Healing Post-Traumatic Stress. I'm Kaylee, I'm your host here at the Shift Network, and I'm really thrilled to be hosting today's program, bringing you Sienna Terranova, lead instructor and practicum supervisor at Bodhi Academy, as well as transpersonal psychologist Myrriah Jannette, PhD. We're very excited to be able to announce a powerful 6-month certification program for counselors, coaches, and holistic wellness practitioners with Sienna and her team of experienced trainers that we'll share about later in the event. I'd like to welcome Sienna and Myrriah, and I'm going to share a little bit more about our presenters. So we have a full hour with Sienna and Myrriah today, and I'd like to dive right in. Then at the end of our time together, we'll share how you can make a bigger commitment to your own transformation through a truly groundbreaking program, the Psilocybin Guide certification, an interdisciplinary training and practicum from the Shift Network and Bodhi Academy. Before we get into the training, I'd like to introduce our presenters. Sienna, an ordained interfaith spiritual leader and community organizer, has a distinguished background as an underground guide with 15 years of active practice. Her expertise was instrumental during the establishment of Oregon's legal framework for psilocybin use. As a member of the Rules Advisory Committee at Oregon Psilocybin Services, part of the Oregon Health Authority, Sienna's insights helped shape the nation's first psilocybin facilitator licensure program. At Bodhi Academy, she not only contributed to the development of the curriculum, but also serves as a lead instructor and practicum supervisor. As one of the first state-licensed psilocybin facilitators in the world, she supervises and trains other guides and facilitators and collaborates with experts to create retreat programs focused on healing and spiritual exploration through psilocybin. Myrriah Jannette, PhD, is a transpersonal psychologist. She's certified in psychedelic-assisted therapy and research through the California Institute of Integral Studies. She's certified in MDMA-assisted therapy and is an adherence rater with the psychedelic research team at Lykos Therapeutics, formerly MAPS. And with that, let's go ahead and move into today's workshop. Welcome, Sienna. Welcome, Myrriah.
Thank you. Sorry, Myrriah. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Kaylee, and thank you so much for being here with me today, Myrriah. It's an honor.
Yes, it is a blessing and honor. Great to be here with all of you.
Great. So today we are going to be talking about the very vast and incredibly important topic of navigating challenges that are presented alongside long-term trauma, PTSD, childhood trauma in the context of psilocybin. I'm really excited to dive into this topic. I think it's a very pressing and important thing to have a comprehensive understanding in when we are talking about navigating the psilocybin landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. It is quite an important topic. It is definitely trauma, comes up when people are using psilocybin. So having a deep understanding of what can present and how to work with different presentations is really essential as a guide.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. We are going to have the assistance of the very lovely Kaylee in navigating our slideshow presentation today. So whenever you're ready, excellent. Great. So this first slide that we're looking at, we wanted to start the presentation today by touching on what the research tells us about how psilocybin is able to be such a powerful aid in navigating complex trauma. As it says right in the title, it's complex. There are many different layers and there are many different mechanisms that psilocybin can help to support. So this is a list. Sorry, I'm just going to make a slight adjustment to my screen here. This is a compilation of different data points that PubMed has put together. There's a link to the article down below that talk about those primary mechanisms for helping us to address the challenges that come up around complex trauma from a number of different angles. You know, there are physiological cofactors at play, which psilocybin is very beneficial in alleviating. There are, of course, psychological, emotional, spiritual byproducts of long-term trauma. And so one of the things that I think is so exciting about psilocybin is that it really is a catalyst for helping to bring regulation and resolution to all of those different aspects of trauma and how it affects the brain and how it affects the individual. I'm sure, Myrriah, you have seen in your work, you know, that cascade effect of benefits that come from engaging in psilocybin.
Yeah, I have. It does modulate the default mode network, which is kind of like our normal patterning of our brain in our normal everyday lives. And it kind of gets us out of that patterning and opens different parts of the brain so we can access memories that may not be as easily recalled in our normal everyday thinking, or even just new thought processes, and open the self up to an inner intelligence that a person may not even have known that they had access to. So it is pretty amazing what psilocybin can do.
Yeah, I agree completely. It is so beautiful to witness that process unfolding, you know, to witness individuals coming back into relation with that inner healing capacity, and being able to hold space for themselves in a different way. It's one of my favorite parts of this work. You know, in addition to the benefits that Myrriah just mentioned, you know, co-creating an environment that allows for traumatic memories to be revisited and to be reprocessed in ways that can serve the individual. You know, from the physiological side, we have a lot of things happening, you know, changes in the neural landscape, increasing synaptic plasticity in the brain is huge. There's a study that this article references, if you are inclined to go there and check it out further, you know, that shows the incredible potential that psilocybin has for fear extinction, you know, for bringing us into a neurological state that will allow us to be able to process fear in healthy ways that fear extinction process is heavily challenged when we're looking at an individual and a brain that has endured long-term trauma. It's really important to be able to have the neural chemistry available to support the work. And, you know, whatever that work may be, working with a therapist, working with a guide, it's more difficult to do that if we're standing in the center of the bee storm. And psilocybin really helps to bring more coherence, a more regulated state to be able to start digging in and doing the work. Okay, so now I want to start moving into more practical applications of what are we going to see? How are we going to be able to show up for these individuals throughout their entire process? You know, and it starts at the very beginning. If we could get the next slide, Kaylee. So, you know, throughout the entire process of your work with a client who has challenges around trauma, we're going to have to potentially likely approach that individual and their work a little bit differently than the next person. So from intake, screening, preparation, administration, integration, at all stages, there are some special considerations that we need to keep in mind. Above and beyond all else is maintaining a relationship that is safe with the client, maintaining environments that are safe, building a strong alliance with your client through working on attunement, being very engaged in active listening, lots of different tools and lots of different strategies to create an authentic, genuine relationship where there is trust and there is an ability to be vulnerable. That is really foundational in working with any client, but in particular, working with clients who have trauma, who have complex trauma. So this list is talking about some special considerations, some things that we see often when we are talking about childhood trauma, PTSD, people who have carried their experience for a very long time.
Yeah, can I add as well, Sienna, the therapeutic alliance is extremely important in establishing trust and safety as well. And as a guide, I think part of it is establishing the self-trust as well, that the client begin to establish that relationship with themselves and working on more trust of the self, because really, there is a guide with them, but this journey is really their inner journey. And when you've experienced trauma, you can begin to lose that sense of self-trust and have a disconnect with your own intuition and knowing. And so in preparation and initial meetings, it's allowing the client to know that kind of they're in charge, and also connecting with the self is extremely important.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. Yes, that is a hugely, critically important piece of this work. It is, you're absolutely right, the most important part. And it's a beautiful thing, again, to be able to work with clients and to witness that relationship of trust being reestablished with themselves. It is so powerful. And you're absolutely right. The guide is there for a certain amount of time, and there to ask important questions and support and be an ally, but ultimately, individuals are to go and live the rest of their lives. And you're absolutely dead on with that. I'm really glad you mentioned that as a very important, primary important facet of reestablishing trust or establishing trust. On this list, we see things like reactivation of traumatic memories, and managing states of overwhelm or disassociation. Here again, this is where it becomes really critical to have trauma-informed preparation techniques and tools in place to be able to give clients an opportunity to use different tools and techniques and to practice them and get comfortable with them in preparation, so that as they move forward throughout administration and then into integration and then into the rest of their lives, they can be resourced to be able to use that tool or technique. So it's very important to have a good toolbox of tools as a guide to be able to find tools and techniques that resonate and connect with the client. Because if you only have a couple of tools, those will work for some people and they will not work for others. And, a part of that sense of safety is for the client to know that they can use the tools or techniques when they need them, should they face a challenge in their journey or in their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I very much agree. I think when we're talking about trauma, and if a client is coming in specifically to address traumatic experiences and to heal from that, then it is highly likely that they're going to recall the traumatic memory. And I think it can be like sensationalize that the experience is going to be like this blissful, transformative experience, but it can also be a really hard journey to relive those things and to have those memories feel so real in the moment. And, one of the things I think it could be letting the client know that if they have the eye shades on and earphones on and they're listening to music and things are just getting really real and intense and they may be overwhelmed, that they can take off the eye shades and open their eyes and just look at you as a grounding person to bring them back into the moment, that they don't always have to go to that place of overwhelm. That there can be a moment of stepping away from it and taking a breather and doing breathing exercises. Specifically, I think our breath is extremely important every day, all day, but especially in these psychedelic journeys, to slow the breathing, deep breathing, and to bring the focus back into the body and to feel what is happening in the body instead of just like the visuals and what's going on in the mind.
Absolutely. That tool is an absolute gem. If you don't have it in the toolbox, put it in there. It is that is a really important piece of guidance. And that's something that we're going to actually talk about. Kaylee, could we see the next slide? A really important piece of creating that ongoing sense of safety is being extra mindful of set and setting considerations. On this slide, it says mindset considerations because that is what set refers to. It refers to the mindset of the client. And, there are a number of different things that we'll talk about that are cofactors of helping to foster the most positive possible mindset ahead of the journey, going into the journey. And a really important piece of that are those navigation tools and education that Myrriah just mentioned. That instruction that Myrriah just gave, of when things get too intense, I'm here to support you. I'm here to be an anchor, sit up, take off the eye shade, take off the headset. That's a really important one. It's a very simple one, but it also puts, it empowers the client, right? It empowers them to be able to say, I need to take a break, and to be able to take a break. And giving them that tool and that information in preparation in the education session, is invaluable. So I'm glad you mentioned that simple but powerful and primary tool that is so important for people who are navigating real life journeys. And your point is well made, Myrriah, that there's maybe a storyline that says that all mystical experiences are, divine and rainbows and, fluffy clouds, but we can have mystical experiences through challenging journeys. It happens all the time. My own personal, most profound mystical experiences have come, not through golden hued sunshine, but through having to come face to face with some things that maybe I was avoiding. But it is super important that when a client is agreeing to do this work and to go in and to face trauma, particularly long-term trauma or early childhood trauma, that they are extremely well resourced in themselves. Because to your point, they're their own greatest ally. And for many people, they're learning that for the first time. They're coming home to that knowing for the first time in a long time, maybe ever. So it's very helpful for them to have tools that are supportive and education that's supportive so that they have an idea of what to expect along the way.
Yes, I agree, Sienna. And in regards to mindset, as the guide, having an understanding of the client's expectation and what they think is going to happen in the journey is an essential thing to know beforehand. It's interesting. Some clients I've worked with have had the expectation that they were going to go through a really hard journey and relive their traumatic experience, and that's what they needed. And then their journey was very peaceful. You know, they just had very subtle visuals and had no anxiety. And it was just a sense of peacefulness and relaxation that they hadn't experienced. They couldn't recall experiencing that in their lifetime before. But they thought of it in a way as a disappointment because they wanted the visuals. They wanted to really delve into that traumatic experience. And in the integration work with them, you know, we talked a lot about when you do these journeys, your body and your mind really give you what you need in that moment. And this client had never really experienced that sense of peace. So really like finding gratitude for that and really trusting that that's what they needed in the moment. And then I've worked with other clients that have thought it's just going to be this blissful, divine experience. And then it was a tough journey for them. And then the integration process was really a long, drawn out journey of like transformation and evolution and trying to figure out, well, why was it such a difficult journey for them? And so knowing the expectation of the client, and when you know what their expectations are, being sure that you share with them the other possibilities of the other side of what can happen, so they have a well-rounded idea of what may surface during the journey.
That is very important, very well made point. Managing expectations and, you know, really having in-depth conversations about expectations, as well as, of course, you know, everyone's favorite navigation tool and a sticking point for many people, surrender. You know, these are all really important parts of the process. Certainly when it comes to integration, having had conversations around expectations in preparation is going to really come into benefit the relationship, benefit the client in integration as well. Because there again, you know, we have this, there's sort of a piece of the narrative that implies that once you have the journey and you do your 2 integration sessions or 3 or 4, whatever you've agreed to, that, well, that's going to be the end of the process. But as we know, integration is rarely buttoned up in that way. You know, we've got a good firm foundation, and integration is going to continue to evolve. So that's another aspect of that managing expectations piece. And, you know, again, going back to that therapeutic alliance and sense of safety, you know, to be able, for the client to be able to feel safe and to feel comfortable sharing with you what their expectations are so that you can best serve them. It all, in my mind, goes back to what is the foundation of trust, authentic trust that exists between the guide and the client and the individual and themselves. Could we slide over to the next slide, Kaylee? So this is another important part of that safety situation, right? Safety conversation that we're having. The other side of the set and setting that we all hear about, you know, setting considerations. What is the environment? And for clients who have a history of trauma, there are some very important considerations in setting. You know, noise pollution is at the top of the list. You know, if you have a client coming in And, let's say they're coming for PTSD and they're a veteran, hearing a bunch of street traffic and sirens going by and people walking by and dogs barking, that may be very triggering. That may not be a conducive environment for having a psilocybin session. So there are extra layers of consideration when we are talking about engaging in psilocybin with a client who has significant trauma. Another piece of that conversation is the location. Of course, nature comes up a lot, and nature is, of course, a beautiful, amazing setting for a psilocybin session, having the flexibility for a person to be able to go indoors or outdoors, perhaps. But for some clients who have a presentation of trauma, a nature setting may not be appropriate for them. They may prefer to be in a city, closer to resources, closer to a hospital, closer to a this or that, So really looking at each individual and their individual presentation, their individual desires and concerns, that's an important part of setting considerations that we need to bring into focus when we are navigating the space with people with trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even thinking about the layout of the room and where they will be laying. If you are working with someone who is a veteran and has PTSD and their back is to the door, that is going to possibly make them feel uncomfortable to not know what's going on, or also being sure that no one is going to enter the room unannounced or just show up. If there are two guides in the room, if you have a male and a female, and the female needs to use the restroom and your client is a woman who's experienced sexual trauma, making sure beforehand that she's going to feel comfortable being in the room with the male guide if the female has to leave for lunch or for a bathroom break. And there's a lot of components to take into consideration, that when you are doing preparation, you're really finding out what is going to make the space feel safest for the client.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great considerations. Those are important considerations. And I think as well, being flexible in the moment, because as we're all aware, what feels good or what feels comfortable in an ordinary state of consciousness may no longer feel comfortable once a person is in an altered state of consciousness. So, being willing to be flexible, change your position, change where you're sitting, in the context of safety, of course, but supporting the shifting states of consciousness that a client may go through, and being okay with making changes in the moment, changing where your seat is, for example. Another piece of this equation, is making sure that you have comfort items in place ahead of time. So, even with let's say a non-trauma presentation, there are going to be comfort considerations to take into account, fluctuating body temperature, for example. But when it comes to clients who have long-term trauma, they often have various comfort items that they use in their regular life. So having a conversation about that, again, this is a piece of resourcing, right? This is a piece of building their confidence and their relationship back with themselves, to say, okay, what do you have in your private life that supports you? When you're feeling uncomfortable, when you're feeling anxious, when you're feeling this, that, or the other thing, what are the tools that you have at your disposal? What are your comfort items? And bringing those into your own awareness so that you can get comfortable with these items and bring them in to be able to support the client as they move through their journey.
Yeah, and some people have service animals that are their
Mhm.
so as a guide, I think taking into consideration, are you gonna be comfortable with a service animal being part of the experience as well?
Yeah, that's a very good point. A very, very good point. Um, yeah, service animals are definitely a consideration that you'll have to navigate as a guide. You know, as Myrriah said, figuring out where your comfort levels are so that you are able to maintain that grounded, focused presence that is required from a guide. You know, if you are going to feel triggered by a service animal, um, that's going to make it more problematic for you to be that grounded, centered, calming presence in the room. So, an important consideration. Can we get the last slide, Kaylee? Okay, great. So, you know, we've talked about some of these different aspects of aftercare considerations as we've moved through the training. You know, as Myrriah so wisely brought up, managing expectations is a big part of this. You know, speaking with your client about the integration is a long-term process, and that it may not be all buttoned up and tied with a bow by the end of your scheduled integration sessions with them. That may look like a lot of different things. You know, it may look like um, having a strong referral network and an interdisciplinary approach where, you know, they're going to transition out of the guide's care into a therapeutic relationship, or, you know, working with a breathwork facilitator, or many different referrals, many different items on that list, pillars of support that are going to be able to carry them forward. You know, whatever tools we're using, whatever resources we are suggesting, any practices that we are offering, you know, we need to be client-centered at all stages of that, of those plannings and those recommendations, so that clients are well resourced to be able to use the tools, use the referrals, you know, engage in their integration in a meaningful way. If we're just saying, well, you know, do this and this and this and this, well, some clients aren't ever going to be able to access those tools or access the referrals or the resources that we're offering. So, you know, I think it's critically important with any client, but especially with a client who is in the recovery process with trauma, that we are putting plans in place that actually support the individual because they themselves have created the plan. That is the greatest possible way to ensure that they'll be able to use the tools, is for them to resource themselves to make plans with, of course, with your support and suggestions as well. Do you have something you'd like to highlight or add to aftercare, Myrriah?
Yes, I mean, integration is where it's at. The psychedelic journey is the pinnacle point, and then the integration is where it's at. And the conversation about integration should begin really in the beginning and then all throughout. Making sure that a client lets their, if they had a therapist beforehand or a doctor they're working with, to let them know what they're doing, so that way they can have the continued care with them afterwards as well. And really letting the client know that it is a journey. Integration is the journey too. And you can't really specify the amount of time that it's going to take. You know, there's a lot of integration in the first week after, you know, and then maybe it might trickle off a little bit after a month, but it is a continual process that can keep working for 3 months up to a year. You know, you can recall a moment you had in a psychedelic journey, and then, you know, all of a sudden it makes sense 7 months later. So Yeah, and then offering them multiple tools and then allowing the client to pick which tools feel the best for them, whether it be art-centered or somatic-centered or therapy, talk therapy-centered, breath work, as you mentioned. There's a plethora of options out there. It's just finding the right one that's going to work with that client and helping them have access to that.
Yeah, absolutely. There are so many wonderful tools available that there is something for everyone. Sometimes we just have to dig a little deeper. And integration is a long and winding and beautiful, breathtaking journey with grand vistas and back roads and roundabouts and dead ends. It's quite a journey for sure. Awesome. Thank you so much for running the slideshow, Kaylee, and for giving us an opportunity to start this conversation around trauma. Obviously, it's an enormous, enormous conversation. It's hard to pick the best information to pack into a short a short time block that we have today, but I am grateful for the opportunity to speak on the topic. I think it's incredibly important and relevant to our work.
Thank you both. And as we move into Q&A, I just want to let you all know that you can submit your questions through the chat by chatting to me, Kaylee, your host, and I will go ahead and kick us off with our first question. How do individuals with complex trauma respond to psilocybin?
That's a very good question. Well, Myrriah, how about if I let you go first? Do you have a answer to that question queued up?
A specific answer. Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, I think that everyone responds to it quite differently, and what's going to show up for each person is going to be different during a journey. I think somebody with complex trauma, as we've stated before, just really needs a sense of safety where they're doing the journey with the person that they're with. And the setting. Yeah, I don't have a set answer of exactly how it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. There are a number of different potential outcomes. I think it's a remarkable thing to be able to experience alongside of someone. And your point is well made. There are lots of different outcomes. I think for me, a common thing that I see in clients who are coming with trauma, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about that fear extinction piece, that the relationship toward inherently being fearful or anxious diminishes very dramatically, very quickly for the majority of clients who are coming with trauma. And that really opens the door to really radical transformation and being able to dig in and do the work with their therapist or do the work with a guide or do the work independently in really meaningful ways once the fear and anxiety can get turned down. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I agree with you. And on the other side of that, emotions are very heightened. And so there can be fear that comes to the surface that was unexpected. Yeah, so I see both sides of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. And there again, preparation becomes integration, and integration is to some degree preparation, right? Knowing that there is that likelihood, and that even if all things were perfect and we walked out of the journey and we felt no fear in this moment, for sure fear is going to come back, so working on tools and strategies that resonate with the client in preparation, having an opportunity to practice and then integrate those tools into their lives is in my experience very beneficial with that unexpected fear, because whether it comes from the psilocybin or experience, or it comes from wherever else it comes from in life, it is a given. We will experience fear, but we can experience it in a different way, particularly if there's a neurological landscape that supports processing fear triggers in a healthier way.
Mhm.
Okay, and our next question. What do you do if someone gets triggered during a session and starts getting aggressive or unstable?
Well, that's a very good and important question. The most important position to maintain in that circumstance is a calm, present, and grounded position as the guide. Once again, I've used the term anchor. We are anchoring them in that experience, and the training program, which is another part of, or an important part of what we're here to talk about today. In the training, we teach lots of different tools of intervention, for navigating these exact circumstances. They don't come up terribly often, but when they do come up, we need to be resourced and be ready to meet that moment. And, that's a critically important piece of the training program, how to de-escalate, how do we practice harm reduction from a de-escalation perspective. That's really intrinsic to the training program.
Yes, I think that's a big piece of it. And I'm sorry, Myrriah, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I would love to add to that. Thank you. I think that can be talked about in preparation beforehand as well, of the what ifs. What if a client gets angry? That there are ways to punch a pillow and to yell into a pillow, and there are safe ways to release that anger. And also for the guide, having boundaries as well. Letting the client know what is okay and acceptable and what's not, and then having a plan in place for that as well. We want the client to have their own boundaries, but it's also healthy for the guide to have boundaries as well, and to meet there in the middle with those boundaries and have that understanding beforehand.
I completely agree. And I'm really glad you brought that up. Boundaries are critically important in life. Of course, we all know it. But in the context of the guide to client relationship, and in the session, boundaries are extremely important. And, there again, in the training program, we cover boundaries a lot, how to set them, how to maintain them, what to do in the event that a boundary is crossed. So yes, boundaries are critically important, and they keep everyone safe. So I'm glad you brought boundaries up. Thank you, Myrriah.
Okay, and our next question, I think this is really important. Does the training program teach guides how to screen potential clients for contraindications?
That is an extremely important question, and the answer is emphatically yes. Thinking about contraindications and being very, very mindful is another really important piece of fundamental safety, and that pertains to everyone's safety, specifically and most importantly, the client safety. So the training does, of course, teach about contraindications, and it also teaches about things that aren't necessarily a contraindication, but are a concern that we need to address, that perhaps we need to get a referral from a client, from their medical doctor, or their, fill in the blank. And sometimes clients have resistance around that, so the training also goes into different coaching tools and strategies to be able to help a client move through any resistance that they may be feeling around, getting a referral or making sure that everything is at the highest level of safety. But certainly screening for contraindications and knowing what they are and knowing how to navigate them is extremely important from a safety perspective. Good question.
Okay. Can you give examples of how the traumatic events can be re-experienced during the psilocybin journey and how to navigate this during integration?
Sure. I'll give an example, and perhaps while I'm giving my example, you can think of an example, Myrriah. I had a client recently who re-experienced a traumatic event. It was a recovered memory, which made things a little more unexpected. The client didn't necessarily go into the journey with the intention of recovering this traumatic memory, although their intention, the traumatic memory recovery was an important part of resolving their intention. And it was unexpected. It was abrupt, for this memory to surface, and again, as I said before, as a guide, being prepared for the unexpected is really an important part, keeping yourself in a regulated and grounded place so that when something like this comes up, you're able to support the client as they move through the experience, and in this case, it was the cue that Myrriah gave earlier, first of all, let's sit up, take off the eye shade, take the music off, make eye contact. And that in and of itself is often a really powerful place of de-escalation, where suddenly, the client comes back into awareness that they're in the room, where they are, what they're doing, who you are. And that perspective shift is really important for them to be able to get a little distance, step away from that traumatic moment. They went back in, they completed their journey, and then, integration is, as we've said, it's a long and winding journey. And so, integrating that wisdom into their lives, there's been a lot of really beautiful transformations that have come for that individual, just in the power of knowing this inherent truth, how the experience has affected their lives throughout their developmental process, their relationships with themselves, with others, and what they want to do with that going forward, has been incredibly potent and powerful. Not without its challenges, of course, but a very beautiful process. So you have an example that stands out to you, Myrriah?
Yeah, thanks for sharing your example, Sienna. The example that comes to me is more of a complex trauma. And there was a client that I worked with who didn't feel loved by their mother. And it started out in a group setting, and this client was not having any experience at all, just didn't feel safe enough to drop down into the experience, and needed to go off on their own and be alone. And when they had this, felt the safety of being alone, they were able to drop into the experience and went back into their childhood and had a realization that their mother had never said, "I love you," and that they never felt love. Were questioning if their mother loved them. And I could see in the client's eyes just that little child who was longing just to be loved. And as the guide, you have to be in touch with yourself and your inner wisdom of, how can I be there for this client? And in that moment, I made this intention to look at the client in the eyes with love, and to let them know that I love them, that they were perfect just as they were, and to kind of be that mother figure in that moment. And the client afterwards said that it was a really profound thing for them. It was like what they needed to move forward, to process that loss of having that love as a mother, and realize that there can be surrogate mothers in their life. And then in integration really went through, they were in their midlife, so really went through their life to see who were these surrogate mothers for them that helped them along their journey, and to really recognize that and to have gratitude for those women who showed up in the motherly way in their life.
Mm. So beautiful. And that is a really important example of a perspective shift, right? And so that is where the integration work comes in, and that's an ongoing process, to have that perspective shift and to be able to go from a core belief of I'm unloved and my mother never loved me to I am so loved and I have all of these different sources of surrogate maternal love in my life. That represents a really radical paradigm shift. And that was very similar to the example that I shared, of my client really going through their life and seeing where has this experience affected me and what have the outcomes of those decisions been. And in there is radical transformation available. Again, going back to the training program, we're going to teach a lot of different tools that will support you as a guide and being able to navigate these challenges, to be able to start from preparation and move through integration with tools in which you will feel confident being able to help people to be able to traverse these landscapes, and to reconcile these different revelations in ways that are meaningful and impactful and have the potential to transform their lives and therefore the lives of those around them. So, we have all of those tools in the training. We have modules with synchronous learning where students will have an opportunity to role play and demonstrate these skills. And that is an extremely valuable piece of this training program, having an opportunity to work in real time with a real person who is sharing with you, a recovered memory or, aspects of their trauma history. And for you to be able to practice your skills as a guide with the support of the instructors around you to be able to guide you and say, oh, well, what do you think about using this tool or this technique? So that's a really important part of this training program as well, is really having an opportunity to work hands-on and practice the skills so that they'll feel natural when it's time to use them.
Thank you, Sienna. That's a perfect segue to talking a little bit more about the training. But first, I just want to thank both of you so much. You really shared so much wisdom and you packed a lot of information into a really short time here. So thank you for that. And yes, now we're going to switch gears a little bit because I want to be sure that you have the chance to learn about our upcoming training program that they've referenced several times. We are really excited and honored to be hosting Sienna along with our other esteemed faculty for the Psilocybin Guide certification. And I'm going to drop a link here in the chat for you so that you can follow along and learn some more about the general details of the certification program. You can type the URL mushroomguidestraining.com directly into your browser, or you can just click on that link that I dropped in the chat for you. Again, the URL is mushroomguidestraining.com. And when you get on the page, just scroll down to the place where you see the headline that says what you'll learn. And so that's where I'm going to touch upon just a few of the many, many things you'll learn in this 6 months. You will learn about effective dose ranges, the neuroscience of psilocybin. You'll learn depth coaching skills, which is something that's really unique to this program. You'll learn effective client communication, cultural and historical context, practical group facilitation skills, integration techniques and practices, ethical and legal considerations, personal development and self-care, and much more in the course of the 6 months together. This program is really unique as it has a basis in respecting ancestral wisdom, but also includes cutting-edge research. You will have the opportunity to learn and practice direct care skills through a state-of-the-art 100-hour practicum experience through a 10-day retreat in Colorado, which is going to be amazing. And being certified in our program will allow you to elevate your existing practice and support your clients' healing. You'll be positioned at the forefront of this emerging field. This certification will signify that you have worked with and integrated psilocybin healing through an interdisciplinary approach, developed expertise in client preparation, including intake procedures, setting intentions, and managing expectations. You're proficient in guiding both individuals and groups through psilocybin sessions. You've understood the critical role of integration and how to support clients post-experience, developed an understanding of how to work with clients who have trauma, addiction, and other psychological challenges using a trauma-informed approach, engaged in a comprehensive in-person practicum, gaining practical real-world experience, and this is in a very supportive and supervised environment, and gained an understanding of the legalities and the ethical considerations surrounding psilocybin services. Because of the rigor and intimacy of the program, we'll be limiting the number of students to ensure personal attention and maximum impact. If you decide you want to join this amazing opportunity, you will first undergo an application process. And again, you can find all the details of the program and the application laid out at mushroomguidestraining.com. So I encourage you to go over to mushroomguidestraining.com now and give it a read, tune in, and if you're getting a yes, then we invite you to submit an application. And you will see also there on the sales page, there's a number of testimonials from people who've worked with Sienna and her team. We have a group of amazing faculty who will be presenting throughout our 6 months together. So again, I encourage you to go to mushroomguidestraining.com so you can see if this calls to you. Sienna and Myrriah, thank you so much for all the wisdom and all the many insights that you've shared with us today. We are so looking forward to the 6-month journey with you. And I just want to thank all of you who've been here with us today as well. I am so grateful that you joined us for this hour, and I hope to see you in our upcoming training. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again, Sienna. Thank you, Myrriah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee.